For 25 years, my husband Bill mocked me and spent thousands on baseball cards while skipping anniversaries. When I discovered his business trips were nights with another woman, I didn't cry. That night, I finally did what I'd always wanted to do. By the end of the week, losing his collection was the least of his troubles. My name is Martha, and I'm 55 years old. For a quarter century, I lived in suburban Minnesota, playing the role of the perfect wife. You know the type. The woman who keeps the house spotless, manages all the bills, tends the garden, and never complains when her husband treats her like hired help. Bill worked in sales, which meant he traveled constantly, or so I thought. At 52, he had that middle-aged swagger that comes from believing you're still the catch you were at 25. Unfortunately for both of us, I was the only one who believed it anymore. Our house was paid off. Thankfully, in my name only, a decision I'd made years ago that would prove more prophetic than I realized. We'd never had children, which meant there were no little voices to distract from the growing silence between us. Just me, Bill, and his precious baseball card collection. Oh, the baseball cards. If you've never lived with a man who treats cardboard rectangles like religious artifacts, consider yourself blessed. Bill had been collecting since we got married, spending what started as pocket money but gradually became serious cash. We're talking thousands of dollars for pieces of paper with pictures of men who played a game for a living. "These are investments, Martha," he'd say, arranging his rookie cards like a curator at the Met. "Someday they'll be worth more than this house." I'd nod and smile, the way wives do when their husbands explain cryptocurrency or why they need a $300 set of golf clubs. Because that's what good wives do. They support their husbands' hobbies, no matter how ridiculous they seem. The first crack in my perfect wife facade appeared on our 23rd anniversary. I'd planned a quiet dinner at Luigi's, the little Italian place where we'd had our first date. I wore my best dress, the navy blue one that still fit despite my middle-aged metabolism's best efforts. I waited at the restaurant for an hour and 20 minutes. Bill finally showed up smelling like beer and victory, explaining that the guys had invited him to watch the playoff game at Murphy's Bar. "You understand, right, Martha? It's the playoffs. This dinner thing was just another Tuesday to me." Just another Tuesday. 23 years of marriage, reduced to just another Tuesday. But I smiled and said it was fine, because that's what Martha did. Martha was understanding. Martha was flexible. Martha never made a scene. The thing about emotional abuse is that it rarely arrives with fanfare. There's no dramatic moment where your husband announces he plans to systematically destroy your self-worth. Instead, it's death by 1,000 paper cuts, each one small enough to ignore, but collectively devastating. Take the morning of our 24th anniversary. I woke up early, as usual, and made Bill's favorite breakfast, blueberry pancakes with real maple syrup, not the corn syrup nonsense from the grocery store. I'd driven to the farmer's market the day before specifically for fresh blueberries. Bill ate without looking up from his phone, scrolling through baseball statistics while I sat across from him with my coffee. Finally, I cleared my throat. "So, I was thinking for our anniversary tonight, maybe we could try that new steakhouse on Elm Street?" He glanced up, his expression blank. "What anniversary?" Our wedding anniversary, 24 years ago today." Bill sighed the way you might sigh when reminded about a dentist appointment. "Martha, you know I hate it when you spring things on me like this. I've got plans tonight." "What kind of plans?" "The guys are getting together to trade cards. Tommy Peterson found a mint-condition Mickey Mantle rookie card, and we're all going to make offers. This could be huge." Mickey Mantle trumped Martha. Again. "I didn't spring anything on you," I said quietly. "Our anniversary is the same date every year." "Don't be dramatic. We can do dinner some other time." He returned to his phone. "Besides, you know how I feel about made-up holidays. Anniversary, Valentine's Day, it's all commercial nonsense designed to separate men from their money. Commercial nonsense. 24 years of marriage, dismissed as a marketing scheme. But here's the insidious part. He wasn't entirely wrong. Anniversaries are somewhat artificial. Greeting card companies do profit from romantic obligations. so I found myself nodding along, agreeing that yes, perhaps I was being silly. Perhaps expecting my husband to acknowledge our marriage once a year was unreasonable. That night, I sat alone in our living room, listening to the tick of the grandfather clock my mother had given us as a wedding present. Through the window, I could see the Hendersons next door, sharing a bottle of wine on their porch, laughing about something only they understood. They'd been married 30 years and still looked at each other like they were in on the same secret. Bill came home at midnight, reeking of beer and triumph, clutching a protective sleeve containing his new Mickey Mantle card. "You should have seen the look on Frank's face when I outbid him," he announced to the empty room, apparently forgetting that Mickey Mantle couldn't congratulate him on his victory. The next morning brought the routine that had defined my life for 2.5 decades. Bill left his coffee mug on the counter, exactly 18 inches from the dishwasher. His breakfast plate sat on the table, decorated with syrup stains and crumbs. His newspaper was scattered across the living room floor like confetti after a parade. This wasn't absent-mindedness. This was a deliberate assertion of hierarchy. Bill knew where the dishwasher was. He'd seen me load it approximately 9,000 times over the course of our marriage. But cleaning up was women's work, and Bill had made it clear that his contribution to our household was earning money, not maintaining the space where we lived. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under at work," he'd say, whenever I suggested he might occasionally wash a dish or fold a towel. "I'm carrying this family financially. The least you can do is handle the house stuff." The house stuff. As if maintaining a home was a hobby I'd chosen rather than a second full-time job I'd inherited, along with the wedding ring. I spent my mornings cleaning up after a grown man who somehow became helpless the moment he entered our front door. I managed our finances, paid all the bills, scheduled repairs, maintained the yard, grocery shopped, cooked, cleaned, and planned our social calendar. Bill's contribution was depositing his paycheck and occasionally taking out the trash when the smell became unbearable. But according to him, I had it easy. "Must be nice to stay home all day," he'd say, conveniently forgetting that I also worked part-time at the local library, a job that barely paid for groceries but gave me something resembling intellectual stimulation and adult conversation. The library was my sanctuary. Among the stacks of books and the quiet hum of people pursuing knowledge, I remembered who I used to be. Before I became Bill's wife, I was Martha the reader, Martha the thinker, Martha who had opinions about literature and politics and the world beyond our suburban bubble. Mrs. Chen, the head librarian, would sometimes catch me lingering after my shift, reading in the philosophy section. "You know, Martha," she said one evening, "we have an opening for a full-time position. The pay isn't fantastic, but it would give you independence." Independence. The word hung in the air like a possibility I'd forgotten existed. "I'd have to talk to Bill about it," I heard myself say, and Mrs. Chen's expression shifted to something that looked suspiciously like pity. "Of course," she said gently. "Just remember, some conversations are requests, and others are announcements. You get to choose which kind you want to have." While I was contemplating the revolutionary concept of making my own decisions, Bill was doubling down on his cardboard empire. What had started as a casual hobby had evolved into what he generously called his investment portfolio. Every weekend, Bill would drive to card shows, auctions, and trading meetings, returning with protective sleeves containing pieces of sports memorabilia that cost more than our monthly grocery budget. He'd set up his cards on the dining room table like a museum curator, explaining their significance to anyone who'd listen. "This 1986 Fleer Michael Jordan rookie card is already worth $2,000, he'd announce, holding the card with the reverence usually reserved for holy relics. "In 10 years, it could be worth $10,000. I'd nod appropriately, though privately I wondered if a small rectangle of cardboard was really a sound financial strategy for people approaching retirement age. But what did I know? I was just the woman who balanced our checkbook and watched our savings account shrink every time Bill discovered a rare find. The breaking point came on a Saturday morning in March. I was paying bills at the kitchen table when I discovered that Bill had spent $3,500 on a single baseball card, a 1952 Topps Mickey mantle that he claimed was a steal at that price, $3,500. More than I made in 3 months at the library, enough to fix the leaky roof we'd been ignoring for 2 years, enough to replace the refrigerator that made ominous grinding noises and occasionally refused to keep milk cold. But Bill had priorities, and apparently keeping beverages chilled ranked well below owning a piece of cardboard featuring a dead baseball player. "It's an investment, Martha," he explained when I showed him the credit card statement. "You have to spend money to make money. We could have fixed the roof with that money. The roof isn't going to increase in value. This card will. The roof keeps rain out of our house. You're being dramatic. It's just a few drips." Just a few drips. Just like our anniversary was just another Tuesday, and my concerns were just drama, and my 25 years of marriage were just... What, exactly? That night, I lay in bed listening to the rhythmic drip, drip, drip of water hitting the bucket we'd positioned under the leak in our bedroom ceiling. Next to me, Bill slept peacefully, probably dreaming of rookie cards and profitable trades, blissfully unaware that his wife was beginning to see their marriage with startling clarity. If you're enjoying Martha's story, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. I'd love to hear in the comments what you would do in her situation. And trust me, Martha's story is just getting started. The human mind has a remarkable capacity for self-deception. We can ignore red flags, rationalize inconsistencies, and explain away obvious lies because sometimes the truth is more terrifying than the comfortable fiction we've built around our lives. For months, I'd noticed changes in Bill's behavior that I'd chosen not to examine too closely. He'd started showering before his business trips, something he'd never bothered with before. His suitcase now contained cologne, the expensive kind, not the drugstore aftershave he used at home. He'd bought new clothes, claiming his old ones were unprofessional, though he'd worn the same threadbare suits for years without concern for his professional image. Most tellingly, he'd become protective of his phone, taking it with him to the bathroom and sleeping with it face down on his nightstand. When I'd asked about this new behavior, he'd explained it as work stuff and changed the subject. The morning of March 15th started like any other. Bill announced he'd be traveling to Chicago for a regional sales conference, a 4-day trip that would keep him busy from Thursday through Sunday. He packed his good clothes, his expensive cologne, and his protective phone, kissing me goodbye with the enthusiasm of a man completing a chore. "I'll call you when I get settled," he said, which was unusual because Bill never called during business trips unless there was an emergency or he needed me to wire money for some unexpected expense. After he left, I found myself with 4 days of freedom I wasn't sure how to fill. For the first time in years, I could eat what I wanted, watch what I wanted, go to bed when I wanted, without coordinating with Bill's schedule or preferences. I decided to visit my sister Carol in Minneapolis, a spontaneous decision that felt both liberating and terrifying. I hadn't made plans without consulting Bill in so long that I'd forgotten what independence felt like. Carol lived in a cozy townhouse in the uptown neighborhood, surrounded by books and plants and evidence of a life lived entirely on her own terms. She'd never married, a choice our mother had considered tragic but which now seemed remarkably prescient. "You look tired, Martha," she said over coffee on her sun-drenched porch. "When's the last time you did something just because you wanted to?" I couldn't answer because I couldn't remember. Every decision in my life had been filtered through Bill's needs, Bill's preferences, Bill's schedule. I'd become so accustomed to considering his opinion first that I'd lost track of my own. We spent the weekend talking, really talking, about dreams and disappointments and the strange ways life doesn't turn out the way you expect. Carol showed me her art studio, a converted bedroom where she created watercolor paintings that no one would ever see, but that brought her joy. She'd chosen joy over security, solitude over compromise, and the result was a contentment I envied. Sunday evening, I drove home feeling more like myself than I had in years. The house felt different when I walked in. smaller somehow, as if I'd grown during my brief absence and no longer fit comfortably in the space I'd occupied for so long. I was putting my overnight bag in the bedroom when I noticed Bill's tablet on the nightstand. He'd forgotten it, which was unusual because he was normally obsessive about his devices. The screen lit up automatically when I moved it, revealing his email inbox. And that's when I saw it. A receipt from Romano's restaurant in Minneapolis. Thursday night. Dinner for two. $127.50. Bill was supposed to be at a conference in Chicago, but his credit card had been used for a romantic dinner in Minneapolis, the same city where I'd just spent the weekend, less than 10 miles from where I'd sat talking to my sister about the possibilities of a different life. My hands were shaking as I read the email more carefully. The timestamp showed 8:30 p.m. The menu items included wine, appetizers, and 2 entrees, 1 salmon, 1 filet mignon. This wasn't a working dinner or a mistaken charge. This was a date. For 25 years, I'd believed in Bill's business trips, his conferences, his professional obligations that kept him away from home so frequently. Now, staring at the evidence of his deception, I realized how naive I'd been. The signs had been there all along: the new clothes, the cologne, the protective behavior with his phone, the sudden interest in his appearance. Bill wasn't traveling for business. He was traveling for pleasure. And I'd been home alone, playing the dutiful wife, while my husband built a life that didn't include me. I sat on our bed, holding his tablet, surrounded by the evidence of his betrayal, and waited for the tears to come. But they didn't. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: clarity. For the first time in my marriage, I saw the situation exactly as it was, without the soft focus of denial or the generous interpretation of a woman trying to believe the best about her husband. Bill had been lying to me, probably for years. Our marriage was a convenience for him, a home base where he could store his belongings and maintain the appearance of stability, while pursuing whatever relationships excited him more than I did. I could have confronted him when he returned. I could have demanded explanations, apologies, promises to change. I could have suggested marriage counseling or threatened divorce, or made the kind of scenes that wives make when they discover their husbands are cheating. But as I sat there in our bedroom, listening to the steady drip from the roof he'd refused to fix, looking at his precious baseball cards arranged on the dresser, I realized I didn't want explanations or apologies. I wanted justice. Insomnia can be a gift when you're planning a revolution. While Bill slept peacefully in the guest room, his usual excuse was my restless sleeping, though now I suspected he preferred the freedom to text without scrutiny. I sat at our kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. It was 3:17 a.m. when I had my epiphany. I'd been thinking about the problem all wrong. For hours, I'd been focused on Bill's betrayal, his lies, his years of taking me for granted while building secret relationships with women who didn't cook his breakfast or clean his bathroom or manage his mundane domestic needs. But the problem wasn't Bill's behavior. The problem was that I'd allowed it. For 25 years, I'd been complicit in my own diminishment. Every time I'd cleaned up his messes without complaint, every anniversary I'd let slide, every condescending comment I'd absorbed with a patient smile, I'd been teaching him that I had no value beyond my utility. Well, Martha the doormat was about to retire. I pulled out a legal pad and started making lists. The yellow sticky notes came next because there's something deeply satisfying about the adhesive commitment of a sticky note. It makes your plans feel official, irreversible. List 1. Bill's belongings. 25 years of accumulated stuff that he valued more than his marriage. The golf clubs he used twice a year. The collection of sports memorabilia that had cost more than my car. The extensive wardrobe of casual clothes that somehow required more closet space than my entire collection of work and social clothing. List 2. Bill's vulnerabilities. His pride, certainly. He'd cultivated an image as the successful family man, despite having no family to speak of and achieving only moderate success. his baseball card collection, which he treated like a retirement account despite its complete lack of liquidity, his SUV, which he polished every weekend like a teenager preparing for prom. List 3, my assets. The house, thankfully titled in my name only, my library job, small but stable, my relationships with neighbors who'd watched Bill's selfish behavior for years and were probably wondering why it had taken me so long to notice, my sister Carol, who would support any decision that led to my happiness, and my knowledge. 25 years of intimate familiarity with Bill's habits, weaknesses, and the things he valued most. List 4, the plan. At 4 a.m., I opened my laptop and started researching online marketplaces, eBay, Facebook Marketplace, local classified ads. I created accounts, researched pricing, and learned about the surprisingly robust market for used men's clothing and sporting goods. By dawn, I had a complete strategy. More importantly, I had something I hadn't possessed in years, a sense of purpose that had nothing to do with meeting someone else's needs. Bill emerged from the guest room at his usual time, 6:30 a.m., expecting his usual breakfast and his usual dose of domestic service. I was ready for him. "Morning, honey," he said, settling into his chair while I placed his coffee and eggs exactly where he expected them. "Sleep well?" "Wonderfully," I replied, which was true in ways he couldn't imagine. He ate while scrolling through baseball news on his phone, occasionally sharing observations about trades and statistics that I'd pretended to find interesting for decades. This morning, I nodded and made appropriate noises while calculating the resale value of his extensive collection of athletic memorabilia. "I'll be leaving for Denver tomorrow," he announced between bites. "Another conference. 3 days this time." Denver. Of course. Another conference, another city, another opportunity for Bill to pursue his secret life while I maintained his public one. "Sounds important," I said. "Very big potential client. Could really open up the Western market for us." I wondered if Western market was what he called her. In my experience, liars eventually start believing their own stories, and Bill had become so comfortable with deception that he'd probably forgotten he was lying. "Well, I hope it goes well," I said, and meant it, because Bill's success in Denver, or wherever he was actually going, would give me 3 uninterrupted days to execute my plan. That evening, while Bill packed his suitcase with suspicious care, I sat in the living room with a book and my yellow legal pad, refining my strategy. He kissed me goodbye with the same perfunctory affection he'd shown a houseplant, loaded his polished SUV, and drove away to pursue whatever relationship had replaced our marriage. I waited exactly 30 minutes to make sure he hadn't forgotten anything. Then I walked into our bedroom, opened his closet, and began the most satisfying decluttering project of my life. Friday morning dawned clear and cold, perfect weather for what I'd begun thinking of as my emancipation. I'd spent Thursday evening pricing Bill's belongings with the methodical precision of a professional appraiser, researching comparable items online and calculating fair market values. Fair market values. There was something beautifully ironic about applying economic principles to a relationship that had been anything but equitable. I started with his clothes, organizing them into categories: work suits, casual wear, sports equipment, and what I generously called hobby paraphernalia. 25 years of marriage had taught me that men accumulate possessions the way some animals hoard food, without much thought, but with surprising attachment. The golf clubs came first. Bill had owned 3 different sets over the course of our marriage, upgrading whenever he convinced himself that superior equipment would compensate for his mediocre skills. The clubs were worth approximately $2,000, though Bill's golf game suggested they were worth considerably less. Next came the extensive collection of sporting goods: tennis rackets from his brief tennis phase, skiing equipment from our one disastrous trip to Colorado, fishing gear that had been used exactly twice, and exercise equipment that had served primarily as expensive clothes hangers. But the real treasure was his baseball card collection. I'd never paid much attention to the specifics of Bill's cardboard investment portfolio, but I'd absorbed enough information over the years to know which cards he considered most valuable. the 1952 Topps Mickey mantle, the 1986 Fleer Michael Jordan, the various rookie cards he'd acquired over decades of weekend trading sessions. I photographed each card carefully, researched current market values, and created individual listings with detailed descriptions. If Bill wanted to treat sports memorabilia like stocks, I'd sell them like stocks, efficiently, without sentiment, at market rates. By Friday afternoon, I had transformed our living room into a retail operation. I'd borrowed tables from the church basement, organized merchandise by category, and created price tags with the same attention to detail Bill had once devoted to his collection. The piece de resistance was my signage. I'd purchased poster board and markers, creating displays that would make the intent of my sale unmistakably clear. Ex-husband's sale, everything must go. 25 years of accumulated indifference priced to move. Baseball cards. Former owner traded them for someone younger. I placed these signs strategically around our front yard, creating a narrative that any neighbor could follow. This wasn't a garage sale or an estate sale or a moving sale. This was something new, a marital liquidation event. Saturday morning, I was ready. At 7 a.m., I arranged the last of Bill's possessions on the tables in our front yard and waited for the neighborhood to wake up. I didn't have to wait long. Mrs. Patterson from across the street was the first to notice, peering through her kitchen window with the intensity of a wildlife photographer spotting a rare species. Within minutes, she was crossing the street in her bathrobe and slippers, clutching her coffee mug like a shield. "Martha," she said carefully, "is everything all right?" "Everything's wonderful, Nancy. Bill's traveling again, so I thought I'd clean house." Nancy examined the signs, then the merchandise, then my face, searching for signs of distress or mental breakdown. Finding neither, she picked up one of Bill's golf clubs and tested its weight. "How much for the set?" $200 for everything, clubs, bag, cart, and all accessories. "But these are expensive clubs." "Were expensive. Now they're just taking up space in my garage." Nancy nodded slowly, understanding passing across her face like sunrise. "I'll take them. My nephew's been wanting to learn golf." The first sale of the day, and it wasn't even 7:30 a.m. Word spread through the neighborhood with the efficiency of a telephone tree. By 8 a.m., I had a steady stream of visitors, some drawn by curiosity, others by the prospect of bargains, and a few who seemed to understand exactly what they were witnessing and wanted to show support. Carol Henderson from next door bought Bill's tennis equipment. "I've been thinking about taking up tennis," she explained, though we both knew she was simply participating in my liberation. The fishing gear went to Tom Morrison, who'd listened to Bill brag about expensive rods he never used and was happy to give them a more appreciative home. But the real crowd pleaser was the baseball card collection. I'd set up a separate table for the cards, with individual displays showing each item's condition and provenance. A small crowd gathered around the table like pilgrims at a shrine, examining Bill's treasures with the reverence he'd always demanded. "Is this really a '52 mantle?" asked a serious-looking man in his 60s, handling the card with practiced care. "According to my ex-husband, it's worth more than my car." "Ex-husband?" "As of this weekend." The man studied my face, then the card, then nodded slowly. "I'll give you $12,000 for the entire collection." $12,000 in cash, for pieces of cardboard that had been gathering dust while our roof leaked and our refrigerator struggled to keep milk cold. "Deal," I said without hesitation. The transaction took 15 minutes. The collector, his name was Robert and he owned a sports memorabilia shop in the Twin Cities, counted out $12,000 in $100 bills while a growing crowd of neighbors watched in fascination. "Your husband's going to be very upset," Robert said as he loaded the cards into protective cases. "My husband's in Denver with his girlfriend," I replied loud enough for everyone to hear. "I'm sure they'll find other ways to entertain themselves." The crowd murmured appreciatively. Nothing brings a neighborhood together like a good marital scandal, especially one involving justice served with mathematical precision. By noon, I'd sold everything except Bill's clothes, which I donated to Goodwill with a note explaining that they'd been owned by a recently divorced man who no longer needed to dress up for anyone. The final touch was Bill's SUV, which sat in our driveway gleaming with the weekly polish he'd applied every Sunday for 25 years. I'd saved it for last because it required a different approach than the merchandise. I walked to the hardware store and purchased a can of bright red spray paint. Not because I'm vindictive, you understand, but because I believe in truth in advertising. The SUV sat in our driveway like a monument to Bill's misplaced priorities. For 25 years, he'd spent more time washing, waxing, and maintaining that vehicle than he'd spent maintaining our relationship. Every weekend, neighbors would see him in the driveway with his bucket and chamois, polishing chrome and buffing paint with the dedication of a medieval monk illuminating manuscripts. The irony wasn't lost on me that Bill cared more about protecting his SUV's finish than he'd cared about protecting his marriage. I popped open the can of spray paint and stood before the gleaming vehicle considering my canvas. This wasn't vandalism, it was communication. After years of Bill dismissing my words, ignoring my feelings, and minimizing my contributions, I was ready to express myself in a language he'd understand: public humiliation. I started with the driver's side, painting cheater in bold red letters across the pristine white paint. The word looked appropriately stark against the background Bill had worked so hard to maintain. On the passenger side, I added liar, because accuracy in labeling is important. The hood received 25 years wasted, a mathematical summary of our relationship that even Bill's sales-focused mind could appreciate. And on the rear window, visible to anyone following him down the highway, I painted, "Ask me about my girlfriend," because I believe in helping people start conversations. Each letter was perfectly formed, the product of 25 years of suppressed artistic expression finally finding an outlet. I'd forgotten how satisfying creativity could be when applied to a worthy cause. Mrs. Patterson had been watching from her window throughout my artistic project, and when I finished, she opened her front door and began applauding. Within minutes, several neighbors had joined her on their porches, offering their own appreciation for what they clearly recognized as performance art. "Beautiful work, Martha," called out Jim Wesley from 2 houses down. "Very expressive." "The color really pops against the white," added Carol Henderson, whose husband had apparently shared more about Bill's behavior than I'd realized. I stepped back to admire my work. The SUV now told the truth about its owner in a way that couldn't be ignored, dismissed, or rationalized away. For years, that vehicle had been Bill's pride and joy. Now it was his confession. But I wasn't finished. I walked around to each tire and used a small knife to create tiny punctures, not slashes, which would be obvious, but small holes that would cause slow leaks. By the time Bill returned from Denver, his perfectly maintained vehicle would be sitting on 4 flat tires, as deflated as his marriage. The symbolism was probably lost on Bill, but it satisfied me. While my neighbors dispersed and returned to their Saturday routines, I went inside to complete the administrative aspects of my revolution. I had documents to prepare, arrangements to make, and a new life to plan. First, I called my lawyer, Patricia Mills, whom I'd known since high school but had never needed professionally. Patricia had built a successful practice handling divorces for women who discovered that fairy tales don't always end happily. "Martha, how wonderful to hear from you. What can I do for you?" "I need to divorce my husband, Patricia, as quickly and efficiently as possible." "I see. Are there any contested issues? Property, assets, alimony?" "The house is in my name only. I've liquidated his personal belongings. I think it should be fairly straightforward." "You liquidated his belongings?" I explained the morning's activities while Patricia alternated between gasps and laughter. "Oh my God, Martha, you sold his baseball cards for $12,000. $12,000. Martha, this is brilliant. Legally speaking, those cards were marital property, but since he abandoned them when he went to pursue his extramarital relationship, you had every right to dispose of them as you saw fit." So I won't be in legal trouble? Honey, you should teach a class. Can you come in Monday morning? I want to document everything while it's fresh, and we need to file papers immediately. Minnesota's a no-fault state, but adultery can still affect asset distribution. After hanging up with Patricia, I called my sister Carol to share the news. Her response was everything I'd hoped for. You sold his cards? All of them? Martha, I'm so proud of you I could cry. Do you need me to come over? Do you have somewhere to stay? What can I do? I'm fine, Carol. Better than fine. I'm free. What about when Bill comes home? I'll be gone by then. I've got 3 days to pack what I want and find a place to live. You can stay with me as long as you need. Thank you, but I think I'm going to do something I've never done before. What's that? Something just for me. That afternoon, I visited 3 apartment complexes downtown, looking for a place that would be mine alone. Not ours, not his, not a compromise between his preferences and mine, but a space where I could rediscover who Martha was when she wasn't busy being Bill's wife. I found a 1-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of a converted Victorian house, with tall windows, hardwood floors, and a reading nook that seemed designed for someone who'd spent years dreaming of having time to read. The rent was reasonable, the neighborhood was walkable, and I could move in immediately. I'll take it, I told the landlord, surprising myself with the speed of my decision. Don't you want to discuss it with your husband? I don't have a husband anymore. That evening, I began packing my personal belongings, books, photos, clothes that I actually liked, and a few pieces of furniture that held sentimental value. 25 years of marriage reduced to boxes that would fit in Carol's pickup truck. I was folding sweaters when I heard a car door slam in the driveway. My heart jumped for a moment before I remembered that Bill's key wouldn't work anymore. I'd changed the locks that afternoon, another small act of independence that felt monumentally satisfying. The doorbell rang, followed by increasingly aggressive knocking. Martha, Martha, what the hell happened to my car? Martha! I walked to the front door but didn't open it. Hello, Bill. How was Denver? What did you do to my SUV? There's paint all over it. I improved it. Now it's honest. This is insane. Let me in. We need to talk. We needed to talk 25 years ago. Now we need to divorce. The knocking stopped. When Bill spoke again, his voice was different, smaller, uncertain. What are you talking about? I'm talking about Romano's restaurant, Thursday night. Dinner for 2 while you were supposedly at a conference in Chicago. Silence. I'm talking about years of business trips that weren't business trips, and anniversaries that were just Tuesday, and a marriage that was just convenient for you. More silence. Your lawyer can contact my lawyer, Patricia Mills. You remember Patricia? She was in our wedding. Through the door, I could hear Bill processing this information with all the grace of a computer trying to run software it wasn't designed for. The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if he'd simply walked away, but then he spoke again. Martha, you're being ridiculous. We can work this out. Let me in, and we'll talk like adults. Adults. There was something particularly galling about Bill invoking maturity while standing on the porch of a house he'd been locked out of because he'd been lying about his whereabouts for God knows how long. Adults don't lie about business trips, Bill. It's not what you think. I think you've been having an affair. Are you telling me I'm wrong? Another pause, longer this time. I could practically hear the gears grinding in his head as he tried to calculate the least damaging response. It's complicated, Martha. Complicated. The word cheaters use when they mean, I got caught, but I don't want to take responsibility for my choices. Actually, it's very simple. You're married to me, but you're sleeping with someone else. That's not complicated. It's just selfish. You don't understand the pressure I've been under. Work has been impossible. And we've grown apart. We've grown apart. As if our marriage had been a mutual drift toward indifference, rather than Bill's unilateral decision to check out while keeping me around to manage his domestic needs. When did we grow apart, Bill? Was it when you started skipping our anniversaries? When you stopped caring about my day, my thoughts, my feelings. When you decided I was just the woman who cleaned your house and cooked your food? That's not fair. What's not fair is spending 25 years married to someone who thinks love is something he deserves rather than something he earns. I heard footsteps on the porch, then the sound of Bill walking around the house, testing windows and the back door. All locked, of course. I'd been very thorough. "Martha, this is my house too." "Actually, it's not. It's my house. Check the deed." More silence. Bill had never paid attention to the paperwork, assuming that legal documents were just formalities that didn't affect the real world. The real world, unfortunately, was about to teach him otherwise. "You can't just lock me out of my own home." "I can, and I did. Your clothes are at Goodwill. Your golf clubs are with the Henderson boy. Your fishing equipment is helping Tom Morrison catch actual fish. And your baseball cards are with someone who appreciates them more than he appreciates his wife." "You sold my cards?" His voice cracked on the word cards, and I realized this was the first time in our conversation that Bill had sounded genuinely distressed. Not about our marriage, not about hurting me, but about his cardboard investment portfolio. For $12,000. Cash. 12,000? The number seemed to render him speechless. "Martha, those cards were worth. Some of those were irreplaceable. So was our marriage. But you replaced it anyway." The psychology of Bill's reaction told me everything I needed to know about our relationship. He was more upset about losing his baseball cards than he was about losing his wife. The cards represented value to him. I represented utility. "We can fix this, Martha. I'll end the other relationship. We can go to counseling. We can start over." Start over. As if 25 years of indifference could be erased with an apology and a promise to try harder. "Bill, do you love me?" "Of course I love you." "When's the last time you told me that?" Silence. "When's the last time you asked about my day and actually listened to the answer?" More silence. "When's the last time you thanked me for cooking dinner, or cleaning the house, or managing our finances, or any of the 1,000 things I do that make your life possible?" The silence was becoming deafening. "When's the last time you looked at me, really looked at me, and saw Martha instead of just the woman who makes your breakfast?" I waited, but Bill didn't answer. Couldn't answer, probably, because he was finally beginning to understand that love isn't just a word you say. It's a choice you make every day, and he'd been choosing someone else for longer than either of us wanted to admit. "The divorce papers will be filed Monday morning," I said through the door. "You can contest them if you want, but Patricia says it's pretty straightforward given the circumstances." "What circumstances?" "Your girlfriend in Denver, or Minneapolis, or wherever you've been conducting your other life." I heard Bill's footsteps moving away from the door, then the sound of his damaged SUV starting up. The engine sounded different, probably the result of 4 slowly deflating tires, but it was still functional enough to carry him away from the wreckage of our marriage. Through the living room window, I watched him drive down our street, past neighbors who'd witnessed his public humiliation and would remember it every time they saw him. The red letters spelling out his infidelity were visible even in the dim evening light. Bill had spent years thinking he was smart enough to maintain 2 lives without consequences. Now he'd learned that actions have prices, and sometimes those prices are paid in public, in bright red paint for the whole neighborhood to see. Sunday morning, I woke up in my own house for the last time, and instead of the sadness I'd expected, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades: excitement about the future. I made coffee, just 1 cup, because there was no one else to serve, and sat in the breakfast nook reading the Sunday paper without interruption. No one asked me what was for breakfast, or complained about the coffee being too strong, or demanded that I change the radio station to sports news. The silence was gorgeous. My phone had been ringing intermittently since yesterday evening, Bill calling from various numbers, probably borrowed phones since I'd blocked his personal line. I let them all go to voicemail. After 25 years of being available for his every need, I was discovering the revolutionary concept of being unavailable. At 10 a.m., Carol arrived with her pickup truck and a team of friends I didn't know I had. Nancy Patterson brought coffee and donuts. The Henderson family provided muscle for moving furniture. Even Jim Wesley, who'd barely spoken to me in 5 years, showed up with moving blankets and enthusiasm for my liberation. "I always thought Bill was an ass," Jim confided as we loaded my bookshelf into the truck. "The way he'd ignore you at neighborhood parties like you were invisible drove my wife crazy." It was revealing to learn that my marriage had been transparent to people I'd barely considered friends. While I'd been making excuses for Bill's behavior, our neighbors had been watching him treat me with casual contempt and wondering when I'd finally notice. "Why didn't anyone ever say anything?" I asked. Jim shrugged. "Not our business, you know, but we were all rooting for you to figure it out." Moving day became an impromptu block party, with neighbors dropping by to help, gossip, and celebrate what Nancy had started calling Martha's Independence Day. Someone brought a cooler of beer, someone else contributed sandwiches, and by afternoon we had a full-scale neighborhood celebration happening in my front yard. The irony wasn't lost on me that the most social interaction I'd had in years was happening on the day I was leaving the neighborhood. For decades, I'd been too busy managing Bill's needs to develop real friendships. Now that I was free, people were appearing from everywhere, offering support I didn't know existed. "You should have done this years ago," Carol said as we loaded the last box into the truck. "I've been waiting 25 years for you to remember who you are." I didn't know I'd forgotten. "Honey, you disappeared so gradually that even you didn't notice. But you're back now, and that's what matters." That evening, I stood in my new apartment surrounded by boxes that contained my entire independent life, and tried to remember the last time I'd felt this hopeful about the future. College, maybe, or the early days of my relationship with Bill before I'd learned to shrink myself to fit his expectations. The apartment was small, but mine. The view was of a tree-lined street filled with people living their own lives without consulting me about what to cook for dinner. The silence was broken only by sounds I chose, music I liked, television programs I wanted to watch, the rustle of book pages turning at my own pace. For the first time in decades, I went to bed without wondering if someone else approved of my choices. Before I tell you what happened next, I want to hear from you. What would you do in Martha's situation? Have you ever had to choose between comfort and self-respect? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one, and your stories inspire me to keep telling these tales of people who found their courage when it mattered most. Monday morning brought the strange joy of making decisions based entirely on my own preferences. I could eat breakfast at 9 a.m. instead of 6:30. I could read while I ate instead of serving someone else's meal. I could take as long as I wanted getting dressed because no one was waiting for me to facilitate their day. At 10 a.m., I met with Patricia at her law office to file the divorce papers and formalize the end of my marriage. The legal process was surprisingly straightforward. Apparently, when one spouse has abandoned the marriage to pursue other relationships, the paperwork becomes much simpler. "He'll probably try to claim half the house," Patricia warned. "But since it's titled only in your name and he's been committing adultery, his claim is pretty weak." What about the cards I sold? Marital property that he abandoned when he left to pursue his affair. You acted reasonably in disposing of abandoned assets, especially since the house needed repairs he'd refused to fund. I signed papers that officially ended my marriage and officially began my independence, and walked out of Patricia's office feeling lighter than I had in years. The rest of Monday was spent settling into my apartment and making lists of things I wanted to do now that my time was my own. Learn Spanish, take art classes, travel somewhere Bill would never want to go, read books he would have criticized as intellectual nonsense. Tuesday, I increased my hours at the library and started looking into the full-time position Mrs. Chen had mentioned. For the first time, I could consider career decisions based on what I wanted rather than what Bill would tolerate. Wednesday, Bill called. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. His voice sounded smaller than I remembered, uncertain in a way that was completely unfamiliar. Martha, we need to talk. We have lawyers for that now. Please, please. I need to understand what happened. What happened? As if our divorce had been a natural disaster rather than the predictable consequence of his choices. What happened is 25 years of marriage finally caught up with you, Bill. I never meant for things to go this far. Which things? The lying? The cheating? The years of treating me like hired help? I know I made mistakes, but selling my cards. Martha, that was my retirement plan. His retirement plan. Not our retirement plan, his. Even in the middle of apologizing, Bill couldn't stop thinking about himself. Your retirement plan was sleeping with other women while I maintained your domestic life? It wasn't like that. What was it like? A long pause. I don't know. I was lonely. Lonely. While married to someone who would have done anything to connect with him, Bill had been lonely. The tragedy wasn't that he'd been lonely. It was that he'd never bothered to address his loneliness by improving his marriage. I was lonely too, Bill. The difference is, I was lonely while trying to make our marriage work. You were lonely while secretly replacing it. Can we meet somewhere? Talk in person? Why? Because I want to understand. I want to know how we got here. How we got here. 25 years of evidence, and Bill still couldn't see the path that led from his neglect to my independence. We got here because you stopped seeing me as a person and started seeing me as a service provider. We got here because you spent more time polishing your car than maintaining our relationship. We got here because you chose someone else. I chose you first. I married you. You married the idea of me, the woman who would make your life easier without expecting anything in return. But I'm not that woman anymore. Who are you now? It was a good question, and for the first time in the conversation, Bill sounded genuinely curious about the answer. I'm someone who values herself enough to leave when she's not valued. I'm someone who won't accept indifference as love. I'm someone who deserves better than a marriage where only one person is trying. I was trying. You were maintaining. There's a difference. Another long pause. When Bill spoke again, his voice was different, sadder, more honest. I don't know how to be alone, Martha. I spent 25 years being alone while married to you. You'll figure it out. After I hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment and thought about the conversation. There had been moments when Bill sounded genuinely lost, possibly even regretful. But regret isn't the same as change, and loneliness isn't the same as love. I'd spent decades accepting Bill's emotional limitations as unchangeable facts rather than choices he made every day. Now that I was free from those limitations, I could see them clearly. He was a man who wanted the benefits of marriage without the responsibilities, who confused being served with being loved, who thought commitment was something that happened once rather than something you renewed every day through your actions. Bill might learn to be a better partner for someone else, someday. But he'd already had 25 years to learn to be a better partner for me, and he'd chosen not to take the opportunity. 3 months after our divorce was finalized, I ran into Bill at the grocery store. I almost didn't recognize him. He'd lost weight, his clothes were wrinkled, and he had the slightly defeated look of a man who'd discovered that maintaining a household requires actual effort. Martha, he said, looking genuinely surprised to see me. You look great. I did look great. I'd started taking yoga classes, had cut my hair in a style that made me feel sophisticated rather than invisible, and was wearing clothes I'd chosen because I liked them, not because they were practical for housework. Thank you. How are you doing? I'm adjusting, learning to cook, learning to do laundry, learning that grocery shopping is harder than it looks. The man who'd spent 25 years dismissing domestic work as easy was discovering that managing a household while working full-time is actually quite challenging. Who could have predicted that? And the girlfriend? Bill's face fell. That ended. Turns out she wasn't interested in a recently divorced man with no assets and a damaged SUV. I felt a moment of something that might have been pity, quickly followed by the realization that Bill's romantic disappointments were no longer my problem to solve. I'm sorry to hear that. Are you? Sorry, I mean? It was a fair question. Was I sorry that Bill's affair had ended? Sorry that he was struggling with single life? Sorry that his carefully constructed deception had collapsed? I'm sorry you're having a hard time, I said carefully, but I'm not sorry about the divorce. I miss you, Martha. I miss our life. Our life. Not me, specifically, but the life we'd built together. The life where I'd handled all the inconvenient details of existence while he focused on the things he found interesting. You miss being taken care of, I corrected. That's not the same thing. Maybe. But I've had time to think, and I realize I took you for granted. I realize I was selfish. Self-awareness is a beautiful thing, but timing is everything. Bill's epiphany had come 3 months too late and 25 years too slow. I'm glad you've learned that about yourself. It'll help you be a better partner for someone else. What if I want to be a better partner for you? The question hung in the air between us while I considered how to respond. 6 months ago, hearing Bill acknowledge his mistakes and express a desire to change would have filled me with hope. Now, it mostly filled me with sadness for all the time we'd wasted. Bill, do you know what I did last weekend? He shook his head. I went to art class. On Saturday morning, I learned watercolor techniques. Saturday afternoon, I read a book about the history of the Impressionist movement. Saturday evening, I had dinner with friends. Women I've met since the divorce who actually find me interesting. Sunday, I slept until 10 a.m., then spent the day exploring downtown Minneapolis, visiting museums and cafes I'd always wanted to see, but never had time for. Bill listened with the expression of a man hearing about life on another planet. And the whole weekend, I continued, I never once worried about whether someone else approved of my choices or whether I should be doing something more useful or whether I was being selfish by pursuing my own interests. That sounds... He paused, searching for words. That sounds lonely. It sounds free. And for the first time in decades, I'm not lonely. I'm alone sometimes, but I'm not lonely. I don't understand the difference. And that, I realized, was exactly the problem. Bill had spent so many years confusing company with connection that he couldn't imagine solitude as anything other than loneliness. The difference is choice, I said. I choose when to be alone and when to be with people. I choose how to spend my time and energy. I choose what to care about and what to let go. For 25 years, those choices were made for me. Now they're mine. But don't you miss being part of a couple? I miss being part of a partnership. I don't miss being part of a service contract. We talked for a few more minutes, Bill asking questions about my new life with the fascination of an anthropologist studying an unfamiliar culture. Finally, he asked the question I'd been expecting. Is there any chance, any possibility that we could try again? I know I messed up, but people can change. I looked at this man I'd been married to for half my adult life, this stranger who'd shared my bed and my home but had never really known me, and I felt something I hadn't expected, compassion without attachment. Bill, you didn't mess up. You made choices. Every day for 25 years, you chose to prioritize your needs over our relationship. You chose convenience over connection. You chose to see me as a supporting character in your life rather than the co-star of our marriage. I can make different choices now. Maybe you can, but I've made choices too. I've chosen to value myself. I've chosen to expect reciprocity in relationships. I've chosen not to accept indifference as love. So that's it? 25 years and it's just over? 25 years and it's finally honest. 6 months after the divorce, I was living a life I couldn't have imagined when I was married. My apartment had become a reflection of my actual personality rather than a compromise between two people's preferences. The walls were covered with art I'd chosen, the bookshelves were filled with books I wanted to read, and the kitchen contained ingredients for meals I enjoyed eating. I'd been promoted to full-time at the library, and Mrs. Chen had started talking about early retirement and the possibility that I might be interested in applying for her position. The work was engaging in ways that housework had never been. I was helping people find information, solve problems, and discover new interests rather than simply maintaining the same spaces in an endless cycle. My social life had exploded in ways I hadn't expected. Divorced women, I'd discovered, form a remarkably supportive network, and I'd been welcomed into a group of friends who understood the specific joy of rediscovering yourself after years of being someone's wife first and a person second. We met every Tuesday evening at various restaurants around the city, sharing stories, advice, and the kind of deep laughter that comes from surviving something difficult and finding humor in the aftermath. These women were smart, funny, accomplished, and completely uninterested in defining themselves by their relationships with men. I'd also started dating, though very casually and with none of the desperation that seems to plague people who can't bear to be alone. I was perfectly happy alone, which made me much more selective about the company I kept. There was Robert, the collector who'd bought Bill's baseball cards. He'd asked me to dinner after delivering the cards, and we'd discovered a shared love of historical documentaries and crossword puzzles. He was kind, intellectually curious, and refreshingly direct about his intentions. There was also James, a recently retired teacher I'd met at the library who shared my interest in classic literature and terrible puns. Our relationship consisted primarily of long conversations about books and occasional trips to bookstores, which suited me perfectly. Neither relationship was serious, and both men understood that I wasn't looking for someone to complete me. I was already complete. If anything developed beyond friendship, it would be because we genuinely enjoyed each other's company, not because either of us was afraid to be alone. The most surprising development had been my relationship with my sister Carol. Without Bill's presence creating a subtle tension between us, Carol and I had rediscovered the closeness we'd shared as children. We talked regularly, traveled together, and she'd become my closest confidant and strongest supporter. "You're like a different person," she said during one of our weekend trips to Chicago. "You're more yourself, if that makes sense." It did make sense. For the first time since my early 20s, I was Martha first and everything else second. Not Martha the wife, or Martha the caretaker, or Martha the woman who made other people's lives more convenient. Just Martha. I'd also made peace with the anger I'd felt toward Bill. The rage that had fueled my divorce had burned itself out, leaving behind something closer to pity, mixed with gratitude. Pity for a man who'd spent 25 years married to someone who loved him but had never learned to love her back. Gratitude for the wake-up call that had forced me to reclaim my life while I still had time to enjoy it. Bill had taught me, inadvertently, that I was stronger than I'd thought, more resourceful than I'd known, and worthy of better treatment than I'd been accepting. Those were valuable lessons, even if he hadn't intended to teach them. 1 year after our divorce, I was having dinner at a new restaurant downtown when I saw Bill across the room. He was alone, reading something on his phone while he ate, and he looked diminished somehow. Older, certainly, but also smaller, as if he'd been reduced by the realization that maintaining an adult life requires actual effort. Our eyes met across the restaurant, and after a moment of hesitation, he stood up and approached my table. "Martha, it's good to see you." "Hello, Bill. You're looking well." It was a polite lie. He looked tired and slightly rumpled, like a man who'd been doing his own laundry with mixed results. "Mind if I sit for a minute?" I gestured to the empty chair across from me, curious about what he might want to say after a year of silence. "I've been thinking about you," he said, settling into the chair with the careful movements of someone who'd aged significantly in a short time. "Wondering how you're doing." "I'm doing very well. And you? I'm learning. Still learning. He smiled ruefully. Did you know that grocery shopping takes actual planning? That you can't just grab random items and expect them to turn into meals? I did know that, having spent 25 years doing the planning he was now discovering, but I just nodded sympathetically. I've been going to therapy, he continued, which surprised me. Bill had always dismissed therapy as paying someone to hear you complain. That's good. How's it going? Humbling. Turns out I have some issues with taking responsibility for things, and with understanding other people's perspectives, and with... He paused, looking genuinely uncomfortable. With understanding that other people have needs too. It was progress, I suppose. Expensive progress, but progress nonetheless. I'm glad you're working on yourself. Are you happy, Martha? Really happy? It was a more thoughtful question than I'd expected from him, and I considered it carefully before answering. Yes, I am. Are you? I'm getting there. It's harder than I thought it would be, being alone. I never realized how much I relied on you for, well, everything, really. Everything domestic, anyway. No, more than that. I relied on you for, he struggled with the words, for making me feel like I was worth something, for making me feel successful, even when I wasn't being a good husband, for making my life work, even when I wasn't doing any of the work. This was a level of self-awareness I'd never seen from Bill during our marriage. Unfortunately, self-awareness is most valuable when it leads to behavior change, and Bill's enlightenment had come too late to benefit our relationship. I figured out that I don't know how to be in a relationship, he continued. I know how to be taken care of, but I don't know how to take care of someone else. I don't know how to be a partner. Those are learnable skills. Yeah, that's what my therapist says. She says I have to start by learning to take care of myself, then maybe someday I can learn to take care of someone else too. That sounds like a good plan. Martha, I owe you an apology, a real one, not the defensive half apologies I used to give. I waited, genuinely curious about what Bill considered a real apology. I'm sorry for taking you for granted. I'm sorry for treating you like you existed to make my life easier instead of treating you like a person with your own needs and dreams and feelings. I'm sorry for lying to you about where I was and what I was doing. I'm sorry for making you feel invisible in your own marriage. It was, indeed, a real apology. Specific, honest, and focused on the impact of his actions rather than his intentions. Thank you for saying that. I appreciate it. Do you forgive me? Another thoughtful question. Did I forgive him? I forgave you for my own peace of mind, I said finally. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean wanting to repeat the experience. Bill nodded slowly. I understand. I guess I was hoping, but I understand. What were you hoping? That maybe we could try being friends. Not getting back together. I know that ship has sailed, but maybe we could be friends. I considered this. Could I be friends with Bill? Could I spend time with him socially without feeling resentful about the past or responsible for his present? I think, I said carefully, that we could be friendly when we run into each other, but I don't think we can be friends. We never really were friends, even when we were married. We were... I don't know what we were. Roommates, maybe. Partners in a business that neither of us understood. What business? The business of marriage, except we never agreed on what we were selling or who was buying. Bill laughed, a sound I hadn't heard in years. That's actually pretty accurate. I thought marriage was something that happened to you, not something you had to keep working at. And I thought marriage was something I had to work at alone. We were both wrong. We were both young, and then we were both stubborn, and then we were both stuck in patterns that didn't make either of us happy. Do you think we could have fixed it if we'd tried earlier? It was a question I'd asked myself many times over the past year. Could we have saved our marriage if Bill had been willing to acknowledge the problems and work on them? Maybe, I said honestly. but it would have required both of us to change, and I don't think either of us was ready to change until it was too late. I'm ready now. I know. But now I'm different too. I'm not the woman who needed our marriage to work in order to feel worthwhile. I'm not willing to compromise myself to save a relationship anymore. You shouldn't have had to compromise yourself in the first place. No, I shouldn't have, but I did, and that was my choice. Just like staying married to someone who didn't appreciate me was my choice. Just like getting divorced was my choice. And now? Now I make choices that honor who I am instead of who someone else needs me to be. We talked for another half hour, and by the end of the conversation, I felt something I hadn't expected: closure. Not the dramatic, emotional closure you see in movies, but a quiet sense of completion. We'd both acknowledged our mistakes, both taken responsibility for our contributions to the failure of our marriage, and both moved on to better versions of ourselves. When Bill stood up to leave, he paused beside my chair. "For what it's worth, Martha, I think the man you're with now is very lucky." "I'm not with anyone right now." "Then you're very lucky." It was perhaps the wisest thing Bill had ever said to me. I'm writing this story on a Sunday morning in my apartment, which has become more of a home to me than the house I shared with Bill for 25 years. The coffee is exactly as strong as I like it, the music is exactly as loud as I want it, and I have nowhere to be except exactly where I am. In 2 hours, I'll meet Robert and James for brunch at a little cafe that serves the kind of elaborate eggs Benedict that Bill would have dismissed as fancy nonsense. After brunch, Robert and I might visit the art museum, or James and I might browse the used bookstore downtown, or all three of us might just walk around the lake and talk about everything and nothing. This afternoon, I'm having dinner with Carol and her new boyfriend, a gentle man who treats her with the kind of casual kindness that makes love look easy. Tonight, I'll read until I fall asleep, and tomorrow I'll wake up whenever my body decides to wake up. It's a small life in some ways, but it's entirely mine. I've learned that happiness isn't about having someone else complete you. It's about being complete enough on your own that you can share that completeness with other people. I've learned that love isn't about being needed. It's about being wanted, chosen, appreciated for who you are rather than what you provide. I've learned that it's never too late to start over, never too late to remember who you were before you became who someone else needed you to be, never too late to choose yourself. Bill and I run into each other occasionally, and we're always polite, sometimes even warm. He's dating someone new, a widow his age who seems to appreciate his efforts to be a better partner. I hope it works out for both of them. I hope he's learned to see her as a person rather than a service provider, and I hope she's strong enough to demand better if he hasn't. As for me, I'm dating life itself, trying new things, meeting new people, pursuing interests I'd forgotten I had. Some days I think I might want to share this life with someone special, and some days I think sharing it would diminish it. But either way, it's my choice. The baseball cards, by the way, are doing very well. Robert tells me their value has increased by 30% since I sold them to him. Bill's precious investment portfolio is thriving under the care of someone who actually knows how to manage collectibles. I like to think there's a metaphor there about things flourishing when they're properly appreciated, but I'm probably overthinking it. Sometimes people ask me if I regret getting divorced, if I wish I'd tried harder to save my marriage, if I'm lonely living by myself. The answer to all three questions is no. I don't regret claiming my life back from someone who'd forgotten it had value. I don't regret refusing to accept indifference as love. And I'm not lonely. I'm alone by choice, which is completely different. I spent 25 years being lonely while married. Now I'm never lonely, even when I'm alone. That's what freedom looks like. The ability to choose your own company, set your own priorities, and wake up every morning excited about the possibilities of the day ahead. It took me 55 years to learn that lesson, but better late than never. If Martha's story resonated with you, please share it with someone who might need to hear it. And remember, it's never too late to choose yourself. Subscribe to the channel for more stories of people who found the courage to reclaim their lives, and let me know in the comments, what would you do in Martha's situation? Your stories and insights inspire these tales of transformation. As Martha learned, sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, it's getting free. And sometimes, losing everything you thought you wanted is exactly what you need to discover everything you actually deserve,